before we start the movie, I want to explain something of my own philosophy to get started in this. And that is that I want to define for you what I call, now my name is Paul Wheaton, so I'm going to define for you the Wheaton eco scale. And this is a logarithmic scale. So at eco level 0, there's about 5 billion people. At eco level 1, there's 1 billion people. At eco level 2, there's 100 million. And then for the next level, it's 10 million, and then 1 million, and so on and so forth. So you get down to eco level 10, and there's one person, and that person is Sepp Holzer. So now, the thing, and now this is my eco level, so different people will have different scales. They'll put somebody else at eco level 10, perhaps. Maybe, probably not after watching this movie, but at about eco level 1 is where people go and buy their first fluorescent light bulbs. And at eco level 4 is when people stop buying fluorescent light bulbs. And then at eco level 5 is when people take their first permaculture design course. At eco level 7, they teach their first permaculture design course. So that's my eco level scale. Now, there are two properties to this scale, two observations. Observation 1 is that wherever a person is on this scale, they tend to look at people a little further ahead of them and think, those people are really cool. And then look at people a lot further ahead of them and they think, those people are crazy. And then when they look at the people behind them, those people are messing up the world. No matter where they are on the scale, everybody behind them is messing things up. And so I want to pose that those two observations, those two aspects, forward and back, are errant. That really the mission should be to move everybody forward. If they're at level 0, maybe give them a little assistance moving to level 1. If somebody's seems crazy, maybe they're not, maybe they are. Maybe they're both. Maybe they're like good eco people and crazy. With the movie we're about to see, this guy is level 10, so that would mean that most of us would look at him and think he's crazy. Now, fortunately, the people who made this film are making this film for the general public. So they left out some of the more extreme things that he does. And a lot of the things he's doing are like, he doesn't normally do that. But, oh right, they're doing it so that the general public can digest what he's doing. So we'll have the Q&A later, and we can talk about the different kinds of things. Now, I tried to write this down, and of course, you won't be able to see it later. I thought, I'll write it down on the board, so that way they'll be able to see it during the movie. But once it's in the lights out, you won't be able to see this at all. But the key is that they're going to talk about what evolution, or what elevation he's at. He's higher than us. He's at the same latitude, roughly, that we are, and a little bit higher up. And so the lowest, his farm is on a mountain slope. So the lowest part of his farm is still much higher than us. All right, I think I may have given you enough fuel to get started. Yes, we'll do that. By the way, at some point they're going to say he's on 45 hectares. That's about 111 acres. He has over 70 ponds.
Lungau, das Sibirien Österreichs.
Lungau, Austria, Siberia. Lungau, the coldest region of Austria, lies 100 kilometers south of Salzburg. Winter comes early and hard to the alpine pastures.
Hügelbeete im Schnee, Landschaftsformen, die erkennen lassen.
Raised beds in the snow, land contours that clearly show that a very special farmer is at work here.
Auf 1500 Metern
Sepp Holzer, mountain farmer, has created a Garden of Eden 1500 meters above sea level. His farm is completely different from those of his neighbors. His Tauropolia pigs, for example, a robust and curious Croatian domestic breed. On Holzer's farm, they remain outside throughout the year.
Sie leben bei Holzer das ganze Jahr draußen.
Sepp Holzer presents us his land through all seasons. His 45-hectare Krameterhof was one of 8 projects represented at the Expo 2000 World Exhibition in Hanover. The official title of the Expo project was Permaculture and Agricultural Forestry Management in Alpine Regions. The concepts of permaculture and agricultural forestry management were first developed in the 70s and represent new concepts in lasting land and forestry management. The Krameterhof is a model example of forward-looking land management. For over 30 years now, Sepp Holzer has been working his land with a method that contradicts all the rules of standard land management, setting an example for farmers all over the world. Holzer's method tempts visitors, both amateur and professional, to his alpine pasture. Look, cherries. There are still some hanging. There underneath. All different sorts. Cherry trees on the border of the tree line at a height of 1,100 to 1,500 meters. 15 different kinds of cherry that ripen at different times depending on altitude. This means no time pressure for the harvest, for the harvest spreads itself out over a period of 5 months from June to September. A fruit garden at 1,500 meters that also surprises one through its variety. The Chinese kiwi, a fruit that especially needs warmth. Also, the chestnut tree seeks its home in warmer climes. Mediterranean flora can also be found here, citrus fruit at alpine altitudes. What is the secret of Sepp Holzer's success? What is his method? Sepp Holzer operates with the concept of permaculture, circulation management, forward-looking agricultural management that bears in mind the generations to come. Permaculture doesn't exploit the soil, it enriches it. A variety of flora and fauna is the recipe for successful circulation management. Permaculture embraces ecological circulation, this being the ground rule for success in this method of farming. Animal and plant, water and earth are linked together through a network of relationships. By observing these relationships, one establishes an understanding of the network that links all life forms together. Permaculture links these observations to the needs of man. Its objective is to create an acceptable, self-supporting ecological and economic system that satisfies the needs of man, animal and plant alike. Permaculture's variety enriches all who are involved in the process, ensuring mankind a bountiful harvest. With permaculture, the soil becomes richer, healthier and more fertile through the years. Things are looking very different in the field of modern farming.
Sieht es in der modernen Landwirtschaft ganz anders aus.
Standard farming techniques impoverish the land through over-fertilization, intensive ploughing, and the constant pressure of heavy machinery year after year. A monoculture of cornfields, constantly planting the same crop, requires the heavy employment of artificial fertilizers and pesticides. a constant fight against nature. The results? The destruction of numerous species of animal and plant life and the consequent poisoning of groundwater and soil. The foodstuffs produced have little taste or nutrition, resulting in a danger for the health of mankind. Economically seen, intensive farming is unprofitable. It consumes considerably more energy and resources as it produces. The high cost of production, storage, transport and marketing continue to grow. The energy expended exceeds many times the calorific value of the harvest.
Ein Vielfaches den Kalorienwert der Ernte.
Only lavish subsidization keeps monocultural farming alive. And to what price? Almost 50% of all EU households pay yearly to sustain modern farming methods.
Haushaltes fließen jährlich in die Aufrechterhaltung der modernen Landwirtschaft.
Nature also pays its price. Local ecosystems are destroyed, leaving self-created desert landscapes.
Selbstgeschaffene Wüstenlandschaften.
Monoculture in Sepp Holzer's home valley, uninterrupted spruce forestry. This is a problem for Holzer. Spruce trees are flat-rooted. Their roots are incapable of stabilizing the steep mountain slopes of Lungau. The result of these spruce deserts, as Holzer calls them, soil erosion and flooding of the valleys.
Und Überschwemmung der Täler.
The building of lavish dams is supposed to prevent the unpreventable. A farewell to monoculture. Sepp Holzer decided way back in the 60s to convert his 45-hectare land to a permaculture. It took almost 40 years to create his diverse landscape of terraces and lakes, inspired by the rice fields of Asia, where the building of terraces traditionally prevents the slope losing important nutrients and from being washed away in the event of heavy rainfall.
Hinunterfließt und wichtige Nährstoffe aus dem Boden auswäscht.
Spring in Lungau. Sepp Holzer rents a new plot of land, 5 hectares of green, steep-sloping meadow. The first step on the way to permaculture. Step terraces the slope and begins planting. With the help of a hired digger, the work is dealt with in a matter of days. What's the digger for? I can terrace the slope to put a stop to soil erosion. In the event of heavy rainfall, all the material, the humus, is stored on the terrace instead of being washed away. And when I acquire new land, for example this large rented meadow here, my first step is to build a terrace. Of course this is attacking the natural structure, but it pays off very quickly. I don't need to water or fertilize the land, and I don't need any expensive working tools. The digger is only needed once, it's gone again quickly, and the work done lasts for generations. There's nothing more to do.
Und die Arbeit ist gemacht für Generationen. Da ist ja nichts mehr zu tun dann.
The planting begins even though the digger is still working on the terrace. Holzer single-handedly plants over 1,500 fruit trees between the new terraces. An edible forest of fruit should grow here, as always under the motto variety as opposed to monoculture.
Obstwald soll hier wachsen, wie immer nach dem Motto Vielfalt statt Monokultur.
Now I'm planting plum and prune trees here, over there some apple and pear trees, and so on. Every tree the same, filled in a bit. If there are any around, I use stones, and then comes the mixed seed. That's all important, mixed seed. That's vegetables, meadow flowers, all different and occasionally quite rare varieties. In total, I've got about 40 or 50 different plants.
Also Wiesenblumen, verschiedenste ganz seltene. Das sind an die circa 40 bis 50 verschiedene Pflanzen.
Sowing seeds the simple way. The seeds are sown wherever a space presents itself. In the long run, a good deed is done to the ground. Protection against erosion and stability is gained through the wide-stretching network of roots from the various plant varieties.
Und gegen Erosion geschützt sein.
That's the work for spring done. Now it's time to sit back and watch as the plants thrive and grow.
Wächst und gedeiht.
After only a few weeks in early summer, the seeds begin to sprout up on every terrace and pathway. The Holzers, Sepp and his wife Veronica. They've been working their land together now for over 30 years. Farming is both profession and hobby for them. Every straw on their own land brings new discoveries. They can harvest everywhere. Salad grows along every path.
Ihr Salat sprießt an jedem Weg.
Nature has always been the only source of knowledge that Sepp Holzer trusts. All his farming knowledge comes from observing nature.
Hat aus der Beobachtung der Natur gelernt.
Even as a child, Holzer planted small gardens and watched how nature took its course.
Wie die Natur funktioniert.
Holzer's knowledge comes from decades of experience in the field of permaculture. The greater the variety of plant life, the more stable the system.
Befall durch Schädlinge und desto stabiler das System.
This knowledge put into practice here at the Krameterhof means that all plants live together in a so-called plant community. Thousands of fruit trees and berry bushes grow together in near proximity to lettuce and vegetables, cereals and a multitude of root vegetables and medicinal herbs.
An Gewürzen und Heilkräutern.
This colourful muddle has, of course, a reason behind it and fulfills its purpose. In a plant community, the plants look after each other with the necessary moisture and nutrition each individual plant needs. What one plant excretes, the other uses as nutrition. This saves farmer Holzer a lot of work. The plants effectively water and fertilize each other.
So spart sich Bauer Holzer viel Arbeit. Die Pflanzen düngen und bewässern sich quasi gegenseitig.
Wenn der entsprechende Bewuchs ist,
When the vegetation corresponds, whether fruit trees or vegetables, it makes no difference. One can see how wonderfully everything regulates itself. For this I need deep, middle and flat rooting plants together. Deep rooting plants bring moisture and nutrition from between 3 and 4 meters up from the ground and secrete it out on the surface and thereby shade the flat rooting plants and assure that they don't dry out. That's interaction. Each one helps the other. I can't fail because it can never be too dry or too wet. I have to go around my land, listening and observing. I have to understand and work with nature. I have to listen and observe.
Das ist das Wichtigste, das Allerwichtigste.
An unusual revelation. Stones are not useless. Sepp Holzer's land, although often very stony, is never unproductive. He recognizes the profitable properties of stones in his agricultural land. Moisture collects underneath, from which the surrounding plants feed on during dry periods. For example, the hare's ear, an edible mushroom, delights in the warm and moist proximity of stones. Stone stores the warmth of the sun and acts as a tiled oven to the neighboring plants. At this altitude, this stony outcrop acts as a microclimate, providing the necessary warmth for sensitive plants who, without such warmth, will be unable to grow in the first place. So here, 1,300 meters above sea level, we find plants that one would never expect to find, magnificent due to the stony ground. Sepp Holzer enjoys experimenting with plants that are extremely warmth reliant. Grapes on an alpine pasture. The stones make it possible.
Mit besonders wärmebedürftigen Pflanzen. Weintrauben auf der Alm. Die Steine machen's möglich.
The words weed and pest don't exist in Sepp Holzer's vocabulary. Every plant and animal has its function. A farm without chemicals. The Krameterhof uses no fertilizers or pesticides. The balance of plants in the community is the secret to success. The variety of plant life prevents any overpopulation. The giant bear's claw, feared for its ability to spread like wildfire, but in permaculture, the plant sets an example. Every element fulfills many useful functions. Holzer treasures the bear's claw for its many uses. Achieving up to 3 meters, it provides ample greenery. Its inflorescence provides pollen and nectar for the insects that in turn provide Holzer with honey.
Und für Holzer Honig.
Holzer harvests the long trunks when they're dried out and uses them to collect ants' eggs, which he then feeds to his fish or sells to pet shops.
Verfüttert dann an seine Fische oder verkauft sie an Zoogeschäfte.
The trunks of the giant bear's claw is also a sellable commodity, especially popular with music lovers, who use them to make instruments, for example, the Australian didgeridoo.
Das australische Didgeridoo.
Animal life also has its place and function in permaculture. Vole, hare, deer and stag. Holzer observes their habits and plants exactly the sort of lettuce and herbs that they most enjoy.
Und Kräuter, die sie besonders gerne fressen, zur Ablenkung.
The teeth marks show it works. Grain grows undisturbed here. The animals leave it alone. Roots are buried all over Holzer's land, from the culture plants that multiply thanks to the many voles in their burrowing.
Holzers Gelände vergraben.
In great health due to circulation culture, Holzer's Therapeulia pigs lead a wonderful life. They spend all year in the open air and save the farm an awful lot of work. The ground is loose through their constant search for nourishment between the raised beds and the fruit trees, preventing thereby a matting of the vegetation. After this work is done, they enter the fruit tree copse to continue their digging. Farmer Holzer lovingly calls his Therapeulia pigs his best workers. Ecological creativity. Experimentation is the favorite pastime of the permafarmer, testing out possibilities.
Ausprobieren, was möglich ist.
Fallen tree trunks are inoculated with fungus spores. In a few months, he'll be harvesting oyster mushrooms and shiitake here. Holzer has been doing this for years, something that would be impossible anywhere else, the cultivation of woodland mushrooms. He harvests self-grown stone and birch mushrooms.
Birkenpilze und Pfifferlinge. Wasser spendet Leben.
Water gives life. Sepp Holzer discovered to what extent this life-giving force functions in an ecosystem when he began his permaculture in Lungau. After taking over the Krameterhof, he decided to purchase all the water sources. Since then, more than 70 lakes and water gardens have been created, a water surface of 3 hectares.
Eine Wasseroberfläche von über 3 Hektar.
Lakes and ditches, channels and water storage pools, a complex of water systems that Holzer has many different uses for.
Vielfältige Art nutzt.
The hydroelectric power plant generates enough power to cover all the needs of the farm.
Das genügend Strom für den ganzen landwirtschaftlichen Betrieb produziert. Teiche und
The ponds and wetlands are teeming with life. A multitude of fish, shrimp, frogs and water plants have established their habitat here.
Hat sich hier angesiedelt.
The farmer uses tree trunks and flat areas to create his ponds. These provide minnows shelter from their natural enemies.
Vor ihren natürlichen Feinden.
A paradise in water, predator and prey living in harmony without need of external feeding. The fish use the flat areas to spawn. Even exotic fish, such as the Japanese koi carp, feel at home here. The water temperature is unusually clement in Holzer's ponds. The reason for this is the careful introduction of boulders, which warm in the sun and pass this warmth on to the water, a welcome heat source for the water plants.
Für die Wasserpflanzen ein willkommener Wärmespeicher.
The climate of the Krameterhof is greatly affected by the ponds.
Sehr stark beeinflusst.
The sun's reflection off the water radiates onto the neighboring slope.
Strahlt sie auch auf den danebenliegenden Hang.
This creates a special microclimate. The sun trap snaps shut.
Schnappt wieder zu.
Ideal conditions for cherries. The raised beds also create a microclimate. The beds are planted against the direction of the wind and thereby store warmth and moisture.
Bedeckt vom Blüten.
Covered by a sea of flowers, the buckwheat on the hill in summer is barely visible. 20 different varieties of potato grow here, mixed together with cereal crops, lettuce, radishes, and cabbages. Holzer uses hardy crop varieties that are rarely available in normal trade these days. He also breeds himself, new crossbreeds of potato in a variety of colors. Very few farmers nowadays know of potato propagation through seed. That's the seed from the potato's blossom. This is used to propagate potatoes if one wants to create one's own variety. They split themselves up, the potatoes, the ones that lie next to each other, and pollinate each other through insects and thereby crossbreed. This can be done deliberately, and a new variety is created, and possibly a new coloration occurs. These are truffle potatoes. I have many different varieties, violet, and then very dark blue, black, and so on. These here have got a white edge. They'll become completely white on the outside.
Dunkelblau, schwarz, die haben einen weißen Rand da außen. Der wird dann ganz weiß, der außen.
crossbreeding two different types of vegetable, courgette and pumpkin. Black maize, an old robust variety that served as the basic diet of North American Indians. This red glowing growth is edible, wild spinach, seeding at the moment. Autumn approaches the Krameterhof. Ripe for the harvest, Russian old corn grain. It all started 30 years ago with the purchase of a kilogram of seed. These days, Russian old corn grain grows all over the farm, in the woods, on every slope, along every path, naturally in a mixed culture. Many different varieties of vegetable and lettuce, like this blossoming chicory, grow here as a production plant. As well as their job in the plant community, the plants on the ground serve as a food source for wildlife. A somewhat unconventional method of harvesting these days. Holzer uses machinery as little as possible. He feels that expensive machinery is uneconomical and saves himself the purchase and servicing costs thereby. The couple harvest their valuable crop of old corn grain traditionally, that is, by hand. This agricultural crop has many uses. The corn is either ground for making bread or it is sold. The straw from the crop is used as bedding for the guests at Holzer's seminars. The straw serves as a soft pillow for transporting the pumpkins that are also harvested at this time of year. Many different varieties of plant seed are ripe and ready for harvesting. Some of these threatened from extinction.
Viele alte Kulturpflanzen können so vor dem Aussterben gerettet werden.
Collecting the seed is an important part of the working rhythm of the Krameterhof.
Arbeitsrhythmus auf dem Krameterhof.
A mixture of very different seeds and shoots are dried and stored in large sacks. One's own reserves assure one independence. What Holzer doesn't need himself, he sells on. Rare varieties, like these gentian seeds, are especially cherished by his customers. Farmer Holzer is a nature lover and a calculated businessman. The Holzers are able to farm economically, using the principle as little work as possible for the maximum yield. The philosophy of permaculture. Profitability is what counts.
Was zählt, ist die Rentabilität.
Betreff, Doppelpunkt. Bescheid.
Diversity of harvest, the key to success on the Krameterhof. Holzer sells numerous varieties of mushrooms, vegetables, fruit, grain, herbs and fish. Unlike many of his colleagues, Holzer doesn't rely on a single product and thereby not off subsidies.
Somit auch nicht auf Subventionen.
Holzer's trees are also very much desired. He sells them inclusive of earth, compatible plant community and growth guarantee under the condition that the customer looks after the whole community.
Unter der Bedingung, dass der Kunde die Pflanzgemeinschaft bewahrt.
Storage of the product in a self-made earth cellar. The temperature is perfect in the cliff cellars, relaxing on the slopes. The fruit remains usable for a whole year.
Ein ganzes Jahr lang.
Holzer rents his free alpine chalets to people with a desire to live simply, at one with nature, and nourish themselves on the farm's products. Advertising and marketing. Holzer has no time for this. His customers come to him. Short transport distances and a relationship to the products of this region, a further aspect of permaculture. Beets and pumpkins for the restaurant nearby.
Einen Gastbetrieb in der Nähe.
The cook demands top quality and values the variety of Holzer's products.
Von Holzers Produkten.
Ich glaube, das passt, oder?
Sie können das wirklich miteinander reden.
You've got it good when you eat in Lungau.
Aus dem Lungau.
Since 3 years now, the Krameterhof has tempted the information-hungry in. Seminars introduce them to old techniques, both on the farm and in the home. Harvesting and grinding of one's own corn, the baking of bread and the production of butter.
Und die Herstellung von Butter.
Wenn man da dahinter kommt, wie wichtig ein Brennnessel ist, oder wie wichtig
Passing on his valuable knowledge is another source of income for Sepp Holzer. More and more of Holzer's colleagues are appearing at the seminars and tours of the Krameterhof, farmers that are looking to change their farming methods. There are many who want Holzer to transform their land, and the queue continues to lengthen.
Ihr Land von Holzer umgestalten lassen wollen, wird immer länger.
Sepp Holzer cherishes the fact that the farming community is trying to get back to nature and that it realizes how many possibilities there are to use one's land productively. His advice?
natürliche Kreisläufe schaffen.
Create a natural circulation, then nature will work for you. Every animal, every plant. Observe the order of things, and one finds that one doesn't need a lot of land to live well. It's not necessary. One doesn't need 100 hectares. One can live very well as a farmer in cooperation rather than confrontation with nature.
In Kooperation, nicht in Konfrontation mit der Natur.
Ohne den Begriff Permakultur
30 years ago, without ever hearing the term permaculture, Sepp Holzer began creating one of the biggest functioning permaculture systems in Europe. His Krameterhof is a self-supporting circulation system producing more than enough nourishment, water and energy for man, animal and plant.
Tiere und Pflanzen.
Holzer's new plan also includes the other farmers in the region to turn Lungau into an adventure park, whereby all the farms in the valley operate with an interconnected permaculture and water landscape system. The Lungau is one of the most disadvantaged areas of Austria due to its climacteric and economic situation. Can Sepp Holzer's plan offer the people of the region new hope? Is the project Adventure Park Lungau a prospect?
Ökonomisch, das muss ja, was ich nicht rechnen muss lassen, weil er geht dazu, buttern kannst nicht, was ich bei mir nicht rechnen lasse, sofort.
Farmers, foresters and officials are searching together for a mutual concept.
Nach einem gemeinsamen Konzept.
the symbiosis of ecology and economy, the basis of Sepp Holzer's unusual model for successful farming. The permaculture that he has established in Eißi-Lungau shows the way to a new, lasting future.
Yeah, everybody wave. He's not crazy. Oh, good. You're at eco level 8 at least then, sure. Now this is the Q&A part, in case you all have questions. But first, I took some notes I wanted to write down. A few things I wanted to share before we went into the Q&A. One is that MCAT is here to kind of video this and put it on MCAT. So if anybody doesn't want to be on MCAT, this is your opportunity to run. Another thing is that we're trying to get everybody's email address up here. If you don't want to give it, that's cool. But if you do want to give it, then I'll try to email you as there's more cool things coming up. The idea is that sometime in the future, I think Kristen is going to host me doing presentations on chickens, on rocket mass heaters, and on the wafadi. It's a special kind of eco building. And so then if you give me your email, I'll be able to let you know that these things are coming up. No pesticides, no fertilizers, no irrigation. Imagine the side of Mount Sentinel as the lushest farmland in all of Montana, with production competing with some of the best farms anywhere in the United States, in Montana. Oh, and by the way, you're all missing No Impact Man at the university, but I'm going to spoil it for you. He actually makes an impact. All right. So we have questions? Yes?
What's the annual rainfall where he's at?
The annual rainfall there is higher than it is here. I looked it up, and of course we have about 14 inches, 13.9 inches average per year. He's almost 30, so he's more than double of us. But you got to keep in mind that he has summer too, just like we do. Most of his precipitation is in the winter and the spring and in the fall, when you don't have your growings on the ground. So he still has 2 months of like no water at all. So then the mission becomes, how do you save water? Now I can wax on for a while about that whole aspect. But any other questions?
Does he irrigate through the ponds at all?
He does not irrigate at all. Now, of course, there are some water-loving plants that are near the ponds, and we'll tap into some of that. Then there's the little bits of creek that run in between the ponds and things of that nature. But most of his production is no irrigation at all. Now, to combine these two questions, I'm going to make one more statement. He went to Spain, and they had some real desert there, where they had 3 inches of rain a year. And he took his techniques there, and he has a variety of crops growing year-round through all summer. In fact, they even had a bunch of crops growing side by side, one where they irrigated and one where they did not. His did that. No irrigation.
Repeat the
That's,
question.
Are the ponds mostly spring-fed? I would say no. In fact, that whole hillside was completely dry. So he does a variety of different things, including he's bought well rights for some farms that are far, far away. It sounds like some of the water travels kilometers before it gets to him. And then he'll use that running water. You saw that ram pump.
Yeah.
So that's a special double barrel ram pump that he designed, where the flow of one water humps the other way. Now we'll see that next week. So next week there's 2 more videos. And my favorite video is the one next week. So y'all have to come back and see that. But he goes into a lot more detail about that double barrel ram pump in that. Does that answer your question?
And also the water grinder. So he's then drains the pond. Is that from the pump water? The water wheel.
Oh, the water wheel. My impression is that thing's turned off most of the time.
Okay.
It's
just for grinding.
I don't think it's even for grinding. I think it's for decoration. He's got a Pelton turbine for electricity for the farm, and he has he can handle far more electricity than he actually uses. Any other questions?
I have a question about invasive species. I saw quite a bit of bare soil, which in Montana native plant communities would mean it's right for invasive species, but he's got such a variety of root systems going there. Does that keep invasive species down? And then my other question is about species moving off of his land onto neighboring lands between the non-native fish and the variety of plants he's planting. Is there a problem with things moving off his farm?
I think that Sepp Holzer is 2 generations beyond the problem of invasive species. And so there is going to be a lot of exposed soil as he's reshaping the land into the terraces. And in fact, the next video is going to go into a lot more detail about that. The next video is about the terraces and the raised beds. But then after he's reshaped the land, he doesn't till at all. And then when you talk to Sepp, first of all, any idea that I present is either A, something that he's already thought of and it's already his idea, therefore it is awesome. Or B, catastrophe. That's my ideas. But as far as getting back to invasive species, the place I'm going now is that in the world of Sepp, and I don't know, has anybody here studied Fukuoka at all? So one person. Fukuoka stuff is a lot like Sepp stuff. They're very much aligned. And so both Fukuoka and Sepp Holzer both attempt to say there is no weed. There's no such thing as a weed. Every plant has a purpose. Now I don't fully agree with that. I would, if I saw bindweed, I'd get it out of there. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that's in there that a lot of people would say, it's a weed, and Sepp totally embraces it. And this is where we're early on. I don't know if you were here for that part where I talked about eco level 0, eco level 1, eco level, and it was Sepp. Eco level 10 is one person, Sepp Holzer. And therefore, wherever you stand, if you're more than 2 levels back, that guy's crazy. It seems crazy. So many of the things that he does, the first time you hear about it, it seems absolutely insane. And then in time you begin to understand it. For example, in all of his paddocks, for all of his animals, he makes sure those paddocks are full of poisonous plants. Now, most people in the United States would go around and pull out all the poisonous plants. I don't want my horse to eat that poisonous plant. It could die. Sepp Holzer says, no. And you think, okay, so Sepp Holzer is crazy. And it turns out that no, actually animals eat a whole different way than humans do. We're trying to humanize that horse, which is inappropriate. That horse, when that horse is feeling a bit off, it knows, in fact, it develops an appetite for certain kinds of plants. It seeks out a little bit of that poisonous plant, and that will be its medicine. It will then be a healthier animal. That's how it self-medicates. We are being arrogant when we put a fence around it and pull out all of its medicine, and then damn, it gets sick, and we've got to run down to the store and get ourselves a shot of some kind. Anyway, I've wandered off the topic a bit, haven't I? Invasive species and native plants. Toby Hemingway, the author of Gaia's Garden, has an excellent approach to that space. And it's not a simple thing. Native plants, first question about native plants is, what do we currently eat that's native? So what can we grow that's going to be native? That gets a little challenging. The next question is native as to when? When did Douglas fir trees come in here? You know, when Lewis and Clark came through, Douglas fir trees were the invasive at that time. So if we want to say native as to 500 years ago, do we go and hack out all the Douglas fir trees? I mean, I'm not sure when they came in. Was it 1,000 years ago, 500 years ago? I'm not sure. But at one point in time, they were the invasive. So I would say that allelopathic plants, plants that like to kill other plants, poison, unfair. Well, okay, those aren't fair players. They might not have a lot of space. I mean, inside of a permaculture world. In fact, that's kind of what Sepp's doing. He's taking all the conifers, which dominated the hillside where he lives now, and he's thinning the herd a bit and planting other stuff. Conifers poison the soil. They make it far too acidic for most other plants. They also release at least four other allelopathic agents that are kind of like organic, all natural herbicides. So that way they can easily outcompete other plants in a cheater sort of way. Next question. Yes, sir.
He showed a lot of nice microclimates, and I'm wondering how much could you extend that growing season here with a well-established microclimate?
Well, let's see. To answer that question completely, it would take me at least 3 books. I would say pretty well. I would say almost as well as what he's doing, because we're only a little bit colder than him. Citrus, we should be able to do citrus here. Yeah. I mean, you saw his lemons, and he's got a variety of citrus there. And there's a whole bunch of different techniques. Now, we only got a small sampling of this stuff here I mean, just in how to grow that sort of thing here is something that would easily take several hours for me to cover for just what I know. You know, I know that Sepp's been asked it, and I've sat there in the room kind of going, oh, for hours and hours on end, and we still haven't covered everything. Does this answer your question?
It does. I mean, it seems like you can apply the techniques anywhere. It's not looking for that prime piece of knowledge.
Right. He's done a lot of stuff in the tropics. He's done a lot of stuff. I don't think he's done any place any colder than where he is, which is one of the reasons why he very much wants something to get started here in the Rockies. So, and that's a good point for me to share my personal evil plot on why I'm here today. So, Sepp wants to do this in the Rockies, and so I want to get it set up and going. I currently do not have land. I've had people who have offered me land. That's right, to give me land. But it was in other areas. I've decided I want to try this in Missoula. If I can get to work here, then I will. If I can find somebody who, I mean, there are lots of people around who have lots and lots of land. They have like 500 acres in the Missoula area, and they haven't done anything with it. They've lived there for perhaps 15, 20 years, and they haven't done anything with it, and they are thinking to themselves, golly gee willikers, I would like to do something with this land. So I'm trying to get the word out that I'm here, and I'm trying to find them. So that's my evil plot. I don't need a volcano that's all hollowed out with submarine access and helicopter access. I don't need that. Just a nice plot of land would be great. All right. Any other questions? Yes.
Is he at the same latitude as Missoula?
He is. He is. In fact, I think I looked it up, and it's actually closer to halfway between here and St. Ignatius. So just a little further north. Now, I have a whole list of things I can yak on about to fill the half hour, unless anybody has more questions. Yes, sir?
I want everyone to answer this question.
Everyone? That could take some time.
Pretty obvious, but maybe not so obvious. What is the most important part of that film? And let's say I'll be the most necessary thing to that film.
So you want to make a statement.
It's water.
Water.
Without water, we can't live.
Well, the film that I have next week is all about so I've got two next week. I have one that's general, like the one we just watched was general. So I have a different one that's general, and one is about aquaculture and ponds and all of that kind of thing. And it goes into the water aspects a lot more. I would say sun is important. Sun and water and
Well, I
soil.
didn't look at all, but what I'm getting at is that I have been said to be crazy. I'm a hoarder. I'm not really a hoarder. I don't want to really hoard stuff because I just want to do my part. And I've been trying to stop landfill since '96. I've dealt with the people and they don't want to listen. And ironically, today, and a friend of mine started this recycling of books and magazines out here in the library.
And all God's children said amen.
Anyway, there was two books I just picked up, thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Tonight.
Moving right along.
One's called Earth is Home, the other one's on Water for People. This one is 71 and this one's 52. And it's real interesting. One for 52 doesn't mention anything about pollution. This one has a thing all about the pollution, and the thing is that our government doesn't care to stop this stuff. We need to stand up and do what's right. And we need to have clean water and clean air, and we have to stand up and try to, that's what you're doing. You're trying to, what I call uncommon sense.
So I'm going to sum up what you said, but I'm going to put the permaculture spin on it. In the world of permaculture, we have Bill Mollison and David Holmgren who got together and they coined the word permaculture. Holmgren has a very specific approach to permaculture. What he does is he says, here are the world's problems, and here's a variety of ways to solve these problems. And when we solve the problems, it turns out to be all these agricultural techniques, or like the focus. Then Sepp Holzer's approach comes from the opposite direction. I want to earn a living. I want to make money. I think the way that the man tells us to do it sucks. It's not getting the job done. Farmers are making hardly any money at all, even when they're subsidized to the gills.
If at all.
Good point. So he's not going to do it that way. He has other ideas, and he evolved into this space. And then later somebody said, hey buddy, what you're doing is permaculture. And he adopted the term. So forgive me as I then combine these and go on, and that is that Sepp Holzer, when I last saw him a year ago, he said he doesn't like to call what he does permaculture anymore. He did a lot in this movie, which was 12 years ago. But now he calls it Holzer permaculture. Actually, when I say now, I don't mean now, I mean then, like a year ago. Holzer permaculture. Now he's not even sure if that's good, because there's all these people coming in and saying, oh, you can't do that, that's not permaculture. And Sepp is not a guy that takes criticism like that very well. I mean, he's the man. He got it done. Who's going to come and tell him that what he's doing sucks or should be different? So he's like, you want to do something different? You go do your different thing. That's fine. But this is me, man. I'm doing it this way. I was told it's permaculture. I like the word. I'm doing this, and they're like, oh no. So he's thinking that just to save himself some grief, so he can move forward with the mighty Holzer path of ditching the word permaculture altogether. A little trivia for you. Next question, please.
So my husband's not here, and I would like to share this with him.
Did you want me to try? Is it the question, where is your husband? Okay, see? I knew that. I was just going to say that.
Is there a way I can share it with him? Is it gonna be on
This is going to be on MCAT.
So you'll have the video.
The video and the Q&A. You'll be on MCAT. Now, I wanted to do this for half an hour. I didn't check to see what time it was. I think it was like 5 past or 10 past. So a few quick points. Well, one, did you see how he did his seating? That was awesome. It's all seeding that he does. And he doesn't do very much of it. Almost everything he grows is either perennial or self-seed. So
That's only the new stuff you see. The rest of it, you just.
some stuff doesn't reseed, so he comes back and I mean he's got like 50 different seed mixtures depending on like, you know, what he's gonna go out and do. So he's got brand new bare ground, that's one seed mixture. And then if he's got, you know, if it's springtime and it's where the pigs have been, there's a different mixture. So him and his wife, his son, I think there might be a couple of year-round interns. And then there's Team Sepp, a bunch of people who have volunteered for a 2-year program to go with him and be Seppified. And so when he came to the United States a year ago, like there was like 8 members of Team Sepp that came with him. And so while he was lecturing, these guys were out like putting it all together. And, you know, they had a property that was the demo property for that presentation. And they got it all set up and like showing it all off and stuff like that. But here's a fascinating thing. Remember they said he's got his customers that like these kinds of seeds and these kinds of, they're out there pulling the seeds and they're gathering the seeds up and stuff like that. Sepp no longer sells seeds. And I'll bet this savvy audience knows why. Anybody have a guess? Oh man! I didn't say that, and that's important that I didn't say it. The government has made it horribly difficult to sell seeds. It's just not worth it. And why did the government do that? Golly gee willikers, I wonder why. So, there's a lot of things he doesn't do anymore. He's taxed at a rate of 85%. He has, so we saw the farmers, we know all about, in Europe too, they're subsidized. The farmers are subsidized in Europe, just like they are here. However, Sepp Holzer has been fined more than any farmer in all of Europe. And he still comes out dollars ahead. I mean, does that give you some kind of idea of the income earning potential of this technique? He has, so the other farmers, I know that like when I bought land over on Mount Spokane, the farmer before me would spend $3,000 a year in fertilizer and he would get about $3,000 a year in hay. That was his business model. So now here's Sepp. He doesn't have to pay anything for pesticides. He doesn't have to pay anything for fertilizers. And he doesn't pay anything for any kind of irrigation or irrigation equipment. All he really has to do is wander around and harvest everything. And golly, he got some interns and stuff. Oh right, interns. He has one other group of people that come to his farm. Professors and PhD candidates. This guy is so far out into the future that his land is crawling with people doing their PhD dissertations on his land based on things that he's done. He's done lists of things that people before said were impossible to do. You just can't do that here. And he's doing it. So the citrus is an example. He's breeding certain varieties of fish that would never be able to be bred in captivity, let alone on their own, let alone where it freezes. And he's doing it. Turning to my awesome list.
What is he referring to?
Digging, mostly. Hey, that's a hillside. If you stick your shovel in that could loosen the soil, and then it rolls downhill and turns into some kind of great big dirt ball, you know, like in the cartoons, and takes out 5 or 6 houses down there. So, granted, you've never done that before, but it could happen. And so we're going to fine you for doing that. In his autobiography, there's a story where they were about to dig a road, and they were going to hit like 5 anthills on the way. So he went up and he asked permission, can I have those anthills since you're just going to doze them anyway? And it's, sure, buddy, whatever. So he gets burlap sacks, he puts each anthill into a burlap sack, and he takes it back to his place. Where the equivalent of Fish and Game or whatever, some kind of wildlife guy is there wagging his finger. Hey, I heard you got some anthills and sacks here. What the hell are you doing? I got my ticket book out here. I'm gonna. So Sepp started to quote like different Latin species names of the guy and say, what is your concern about this species because of this? Or, so clearly Sepp knew 10 or 15 times more than the guy with the ticket book. And so it confounded the guy and he left. But he was going to write him another ticket. So what Sepp does with anthills is a story for another day. This is one of those things that sounds crazy until you hear the explanations, but we'll leave that alone for a day. Did you see the plants with the aphids? They're just caked in aphids. Sepp doesn't care. I asked him about doesn't that bother you? Does you want to do something about that? Aphids serve a function. And I never quite got a straight answer. I'm like, okay, I'm sure that they do. And it's very important. And this is a lot of times if I ask him a question and he didn't feel like answering me, he'd say, you need to read the book of nature. It's open for everybody to read. Why don't you read it? Because I'm kind of stupid. So that's one of them. I'm not sure. There was something about pine trees and how aphids play a really critical role. And there are like two or three other kinds of trees, I believe, where if they don't have aphids, or if they don't have the insects that seem to be parasitical, then the tree will die. It was kind of bizarre how you put it. Hey, did you catch the part about the spruce desert?
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite parts. Sepp calls this a spruce desert. A whole bunch of spruce trees. Now the next video is going to go on even more. Oh, did you see the size of the guy's hands? Man, those are massive. Now I've got freak show hands. I cannot find gloves anywhere without special ordering them that'll fit my hand. His hands are bigger than mine. So and when I'm a giant guy, and we go and we do this handshake thing to try to crush each other's hands. I usually lose. His hands are just massive. All right, so let's bring up the next video.
Lungau in Austria, spruce forests as far as the eye can see, extremely steep pre-alpine slopes that appear to be completely unsuitable for farming purposes.
Ungeeignet für landwirtschaftliche Nutzung.
A farmer has caused a sensation in this disadvantageous area by using a completely new farming method, permaculture, lasting agriculture. Sepp Holzer has transformed his alpine farm into a unique pond and terraced landscape.
In eine einmalige Teich- und Terrassenlandschaft.
Creating such terraces in alpine regions, though, is not Sepp's own invention.
Das hat man ja früher schon vor Jahrhunderten, Jahrtausenden schon gemacht.
People were doing it centuries, thousands of years ago. Terraces, the rice fields in Asia, for example, or the Berber in Morocco, the Aborigines in Australia, or the Indians in North America. So it's nothing new, you see. People also did it here. If one observes the landscape with open eyes, walks or drives through one's own grounds, through the countryside, for example, I've noticed in Enstal and in Tyrol, stone walls have been built using stones kept back from the fields, and thereby small terraces have been created that are easier to farm. This has been rediscovered, revived and reformed.
Eben das Material dort zurückbehalten wurde. Und so kleine Terrassen entstanden sind, was leichter zu bewirtschaften sind. Das ist nur wieder gelebt und wieder erkannt und neu gestaltet.
Gegenüber, auf der anderen
Opposite, on the other side of the valley, steep slopes with the usual spruce monoculture. Holzer calls this a spruce desert. He recognizes the problems of such a monoculture.
Ein Fichten ist einmal ein Flachwurzler, ist kein Schutzwald. Fichten.
A spruce tree is a flat-rooter, offering little protection. A spruce tree acidifies the soil, the surrounding life perishes, the storage potential of the soil diminishes, along with the vitality of the trees. The tree sickens and, in a monoculture, the bark beetle population explodes, along with that of the spruce leaf wasp. They're able to show us, all the foresters, what we're doing wrong, but the foresters don't comprehend the problem and fight the bark beetle and the spruce leaf wasp. We should be fighting the Forestry Commission, those who promote such monocultures, exactly where they give the order, where they impose the conditions of what one must do. They don't comprehend what they're doing.
Wo sie die genauen Anweisungen geben und Auflagen machen, was man machen muss. Die kapieren nicht, was sie damit anrichten. Vor 30, 40 Jahren habe ich ja auch diese
I made the same mistakes 30 or 40 years ago, and we've learned this. One has to plant 10,000 spruce trees per hectare. 10,000. The woods are only fellable for 100, 120 years, and 3 generations have to pay their tax for this. And then, this happens to a neighbor of mine. The cost of felling and transporting the wood outweighs the selling price. What did 3 generations care for the forest and pay tax for? That's absolutely uneconomical. Side effects: the soil acidifies, the water storage potential diminishes, the catastrophe is foreseeable. No bird life, no wildlife, no butterflies. Nothing feels at home there, and nothing can survive there. And it's certain that if something's going to happen, it's going to happen there, the forestry areas, where the felling leaves the slopes stripped bare, where it all falls apart. If you look, it's all being replanted with spruce again. That someone can do that is incomprehensible. It's just a question of time until the next catastrophe occurs. It shouldn't only be spruce there, larches and pine, oak, wild fruit, everything should be there. A living, edible wood, where wildlife feels comfortable, ground life is activated again, where one has no fear of soil damage or erosion.
Es ist nur eine Frage der Zeit, bis die nächste Katastrophe passiert. Nicht? Da gehören nicht nur Fichten hin, sondern da gehören mehrere Lärchen, da gehören auch Tannen, da gehört Ahorn, Wildobst, alles Mögliche gehört da hin. Also einen lebbaren, essbaren Wald, dass sich das Wild wohlfühlt, dass das Bodenleben wieder aktiviert wird. Und dann braucht man keine Angst nicht haben, dass da zu Bodenerosionen kommt oder zu solchen Schäden kommt.
Sepp Holzer hat aus den Fehlern der einseitigen Aufforstungen gelernt. Seinen Krameterhof.
Sepp Holzer has learned from the mistakes of unilateral forestation. Over the last 40 years, he has renaturalized his farm, the Krameterhof. A natural landscape has resulted. Ponds, terraces, and a variety of vegetation have transformed his land into an adventure landscape. Sepp rented 5 hectares of land from his neighbor, and we can observe how such a terraced landscape can be created. In just a few weeks, a sheep pasture can be transformed into a blooming terraced landscape. Where Holzer has created new biotopes, he has no fear of radically transforming the landscape. The original landscape has long since been transformed. All over the world, the hand of man has changed the original scenery, mostly to the disadvantage of natural variety.
Menschenhand hat hier, wie fast überall auf der Welt, die Urlandschaft verändert. Meist zu Ungunsten der natürlichen Vielfalt.
Such radical steps are also necessary when one renaturalizes land to create a new perma-landscape. What's the digger for? I can terrace the slope to put a stop to soil erosion. In the event of heavy rainfall, all the material, the humus, is stored on the terrace instead of being washed away. And when I acquire new land, for example this large rented meadow here, my first step is to build a terrace. Of course this is attacking the natural structure, but it pays off very quickly. I don't need to water or fertilize the land, and I don't need any expensive working tools. The digger is only needed once, it's gone again quickly, and the work done lasts for generations. There's nothing more to do.
Ich brauche keine teuren Arbeitsgeräte. Das ist ein einmaliger Einsatz, der Bagger fährt wieder weg und die Arbeit ist gemacht für Generationen. Da ist ja nichts mehr zu tun dann.
Während der Bagger noch im Einsatz ist,
The planting begins even though the digger is still working on the terrace. In just a few weeks, Holzer single-handedly plants over 1,500 fruit trees.
Obstbäume.
Da sind diese Beete gemacht worden, diese Terrassen gemacht worden. Der Bagger hat zugleich grob einmal die Löcher gemacht. Und da werden jetzt die verschiedensten
And now the beds have been planted. The terraces are finished and the digger has dug rough holes where various trees are to be planted. A chaos. Essential, a chaos. This reduces the danger of insect overpopulation. They only turn into pests if I make a mistake. Now I'm planting plum and prune trees here, apple and pear and so on. Every tree the same, filled in a bit. If there are any around, I use stones, and then comes the mixed seed. That's all important.
Dann, wo ich halt habe, kommen Steine hin und sonst bringe ich später noch hin mit dem Traktor. Und dann kommt die Mischsaat. Das ist das Allerwichtigste. Mischsaat.
Mixed seed, that's vegetables, meadow flowers, all different and occasionally quite rare varieties. In total, I've got about 40 or 50 different plants.
An die circa 40 bis 50 verschiedene Pflanzen.
Aussaat auf die einfache Art.
Sowing the easy way, Holzer sows every pathway and terrace with a mixture of seed.
Diese Terrassen sind zugleich.
These terraces are both vegetable garden and pathway, depending on the way they are used. One has to be very careful these days because various approvals are necessary in order to build a pathway, due to the nature and forestry conservation laws and so on. There is always a lack of understanding concerning alternative farming, using terraces for example, even though it presents major advantages in the fight against soil erosion. A terrace, that's where I store the fragments, everything, to assure protection against a downpour. The soil doesn't erode, very advantageous. I can see this on every terrace. It's difficult to explain this to civil servants because according to the word of the law, it's a pathway. And due to the fact that we're dealing with a wood, a permit for clearing is necessary. The civil servants don't recognize perma or agroforestry farming methods.
Bei nach dem Gesetz ist das ein Weg oder ist das eine Rodungsbewilligung notwendig, weil es sich um einen Wald handelt. Und so eine Bewirtschaftungsform mit Permakultur oder Agroforstwirtschaft, das kennen die noch nicht.
Trotz der Skepsis bei den
Holzer remains true to his farming methods regardless of the skepticism of the civil service. His motto is, less work, more yield.
Das ziehe ich jetzt dann ab mit dem Traktor.
Now I'll pull this off with the tractor, put the shield and trough up and drive over once. Then it's quickly harrowed. It's not absolutely necessary harrowing, down here especially, but a pathway where it's easy. One time across and it's harrowed. Then it's a raised bed. All the vegetables grow there, and in between the flowers and the various medicinal herbs as well. It's not a thoroughfare anymore, and only driven across when it's time to harvest. It's a vegetable garden.
Da wächst dann das ganze Gemüse und die Blumen dazwischen und die verschiedensten Heilkräuter. Da wird nicht mehr drüber gefahren, nur mehr beim Ernten. Es ist kein Weg zum ständig Befahren, sondern ein Gemüseland.
The terracing and planting of the recently rented land is completed. Now Holzer can sit back and watch as everything grows. Only a few weeks later, and the mixed seed is already sprouting on the new terraces.
Nach wenigen Wochen ist die Mischsaat auf den neu entstandenen Terrassen aufgegangen. Die jungen Bäume sind gut
The young trees are growing well. Holzer's mixed seed between them ensures a well-balanced plant community. While growing, the plants support each other by exchanging nourishment. This creates lush fruit and vegetable land.
Hier entsteht üppiges Obst- und Gemüseland. Auf den Terrassen
Buckwheat blossoms on the terraces.
Das Terrassieren eines
Terracing a mountain requires foresight and skill. Sepp Holzer explains how it's done.
Einen Fehler da.
One mistake there and the whole slope will collapse, gently sweeping down into the valley, channeling the water off, flattening the embankment and the correct mixture of seed. Working down through to the next, then the next, down to the bottom. When the trees are planted and everything has grown into the bank, then come the fruit trees, then the next one in between, and that's how one terraces a whole mountain without anything going wrong. They drive in with their diggers and bulldozers, building forestry tracks and roads for goods transport, as one can see. Look over at the northern slope, massive earth movement and a tremendous pressure on the valley. All that material can't hold on. A side rift on the valley slope as usual, and every 50-60 meters or so a water drainage channel. Then the water comes from somewhere to somewhere completely different, saturating and loosening the ground to the extent that the track collapses. Then they build walls and cement everything, Krainer walls and God knows what else, at an enormous cost. One can do a lot, of course, with violence and a lot of money. They've forgotten how to work with care, that's the problem.
Aber mit Gewalt nicht und mit viel Geld kann man natürlich viel machen. Aber ein schonender Umgang, das kennen die nicht mehr, das haben die verlernt. Das ist das Problem.
Sepp Holzer weiß, wovon er spricht. Sein neues Stück Land, wo zuvor das Wasser über den steilen Hang ins Tal hinabfloss, hat er sorgfältig terrassiert. Schon bald werden die neuen Terrassen so aussehen.
Sepp Holzer knows exactly what he's talking about and has conscientiously terraced his new land, thus preventing the water from flowing down the slope into the valley. Soon the new terraces will look like this. Lush vegetation will further stabilize the mountain with its roots.
Und wirken so wie eine Wärmefalle.
Another important aspect that Sepp exploits, the terraces store the sun's rays, acting as a sun trap. The sun reflects off the terraces onto the opposite slope. The warmth stores itself here. The warmth radiated assures unusually high temperatures. It creates a microclimate.
So wachsen auf 12 bis 15
Agricultural products can be grown here at an altitude of 12 to 1500 meters that one normally wouldn't expect to find. Various types of grain and vegetable, even Mediterranean fruit.
Ja, sogar Südfrüchte. Aus der Monokultur
Monoculture creates excess. Holzer's unique farm flourishes. Many customers can be found at the Krameterhof at harvest time. Sepp and his wife Veronica harvest vegetables for their own use every time they take a wander across their land.
bei jedem Spaziergang über ihr Land Gemüse ernten, für den eigenen Bedarf.
So schaust du nimmst den Salat mit.
Schau. Ein Wahnsinn. Schau dir das mal.
Ein weiteres
A
wichtiges
further important element of Sepp's permaculture are his raised beds. They also contribute to the microclimate on the farm. Well protected by the hilly landscape, young fruit trees grow.
den Hügeln wachsen die jungen Obstbäume. In den Hügeln
Sepp thinned out unwanted spruce trees from the original monoculture, and these can also be found here between the hills.
ausgelichtet hat. Beim Anlegen
With the planting of the raised beds, the digger makes another short but effective appearance.
Der Aufbau des Hügelbettes.
I dig a ditch for the raised beds to be planted in and fill it in with any material that I can lay my hands on. That's the most important thing, reusing material, the circulation of nature. Naturally, one avoids using harmful substances. Nature has an enormous ability to regenerate itself, thank God. Otherwise, it would already be too late the way we treat her. One should try, whether it be with newspapers or cardboard boxes, to regulate growth, especially when a particular plant goes on the rampage. One covers it up and lays a bit of grass or soil over it. Then one makes a hole and plants something else there. Then, underneath I've got nettles or topinampour, whatever's covered up, rotting underneath, creating a source of warmth. The plants underneath can't grow through, they're damned, and the plants I've selected grow wonderfully. Then, corresponding to where the raised beds are planted, I can sow the appropriate seed mixture. If I've got bio-waste or something similar in there, then I can plant vegetables on top. If it's horse manure in there, I'll plant mushrooms, Egelinge and the like.
Wo ich im Karton dieses Loch mache, die kann dann wunderbar aufwachsen. Und entsprechend dem Aufbau des Hügelbeetes kann ich dann die Einsaat machen. Habe ich jetzt Biomüll oder sowas drin, dann kann ich oben Gemüse draufpflanzen. Habe ich Pferdemist drin, dann pflanze ich Schwammerl, also Champignons, Egerlinge und Austernseitling, solche Sachen.
The reason for growing a raised bed is to create a microclimate with the bed, because where all the roots are, vegetation and maybe manure, foliage, cardboard and so on, warmth is created. Warmth rises, doesn't it? And this reduces the danger of frost damage at this altitude, because it all radiates warmth upwards. Naturally, I have to plant the raised bed against the wind. This means always pay attention to the wind direction. I wet a finger and hold it into the wind, and then, aha! I can tell in which direction it's coming from. You notice straight away, don't you? And I have to do that often. And the direction from where, day and night as well, the breeze comes from, I plant my beds diagonally against it. Thereby I create a microclimate between the beds, in and around the beds. Raised beds have a capillary action. If too much water is present, it's deposited in the trench, and when too little is around, it sucks it up again. If there's heavy rainfall, the water can drain off, but it doesn't go to waste, like in a watercourse. It runs off the hill into the furrow. It's nice and damp there, and the raised bed sucks the water up again, and in a plant community, the others do the rest. Deep-rooting plants that attain moisture from under the ground, 2 or 3 meters, maybe even deeper, sweat it out through their leaves and provide nourishment and moisture for the middle and flat-rooting plants.
Macht das Restliche dazu, Tief- und Flachwurzler, dass die von unten her die Feuchtigkeit aufnehmen, aufziehen, 2-3 Meter tief und noch tiefer, und geben die Feuchtigkeit, schwitzen das durch oben durch die Blätter aus und die Nährstoffe und die Feuchtigkeit ab und versorgen so die Mittel- und Flachwurzler.
I sow the eggs from worms up here in the raised beds. Worms laden with eggs. They lay their eggs 6 or 7 times a year, and that all gets mixed up in the soil. This soil is full of eggs, and I spread this earth around and they can multiply within. They've got it good.
Der Tisch ist auch für Sepp Holzer gedeckt.
Sepp Holzer has also got it good. Under a sea of blossom from his buckwheat, lettuce, cabbage, broccoli, various varieties of vegetable grow happily above his raised beds. Many ancient culture types grow in lush plant communities next to Holzer's self-cultivated potatoes.
Man darf nicht vergessen, das war Moos.
One shouldn't forget that this used to be moss. Moss, really acidic soil, even in May. I planted raised beds and sowed, and one can already see the potatoes. After only 10, 12 weeks, a wet field where it really was sodden, one can now see the reward.
Und das alles jetzt in 10, 12 Wochen von einer ganz nassen Wiese, wo richtig staunass war. Und jetzt ist die Ernte.
Sepp
Holzer knows his ground, previously not suitable for farming, whether stony, dry or sodden. Raised beds and plant communities have created a balanced water economy. Every plant gets what it requires. In Lungau, one doesn't only find raised beds on Sepp Holzer's land. On the other side of the valley, a lady farmer has also planted raised beds, following Sepp Holzer's recipe. The situation is unfavorable on the north slope. Nevertheless, the raised beds have been a great success. More vegetables flourish here than the family can eat. Holzer's permaculture methods can also be found elsewhere. Many other enthusiastic farmers have asked Sepp to transform their farms according to his natural methods. Already, shortly after planting, the raised beds are ready for harvesting.
Kaum angekommen, beginnt der Lungauer Bauer in den Hügelbeeten zu ernten.
Das ist jetzt wichtig abzuernten.
It's important to harvest before it gets too cramped. Now, when the first fruit ripens, radishes or lettuce, always harvest. Constant harvesting to prevent overcrowding and getting in each other's way. And if you look, where I've removed some of the plants, the others have space to spread themselves out. The next one is already coming up. That's lettuce, then poppies, then comes the Swede, then the Russian cabbage, and if one takes care, it all never stops growing. So as one sees here, absolutely fresh, even when it's young, harvest it and eat it or sell it. Naturally, these cabbages here will reach between 3 and 4 kilograms, and this radish will reach quite a weight as well. These cabbages and these beets here between 4 and 5 kilograms as well. And there, one should harvest the young ones, so that the others have enough room. Here, for example, the Russian cabbage needs a lot of space. It'll reach up to 1 meter in height, is hardy, and tastes better after the frost than before. There, the next one's growing here, and the next, everywhere. There we'll get the nicest, there a big one, everywhere. Just imagine that something like this can grow to this size in 7 or 8 weeks. Huh? Simply sewn on top. It doesn't get prettier than that.
Holzer freut sich über den Überfluss.
Holzer delights in the excess. More grows on top of the raised beds than the owner could ever consume. Holzer's animals, his colleagues, receive a third of the harvest and also delight in the excess of feed. What can't be consumed becomes productive bio-waste. Even the robust Asian yaks delight in a tasty extra portion. Home-produced feedstuff. The owner of the yak saves himself the expensive cost of transporting fodder through half of Europe.
Futtermitteltransporte durch halb Europa. Sepp
Holzer's raised beds in winter. It's hard to believe that under all this snow there is life, but the worms and bio-waste assure that Sepp Holzer is able to harvest potatoes in February.
Dass Holzer selbst im Februar Kartoffeln ernten kann.
Yams. These up here are They're as big in there too. Look over there. Over there, wildlife digging away.
Sepp Holzers Terrassen und Hügelbeete.
Sepp Holzer's terraces and raised beds form an adventure landscape of extraordinary beauty. There, the farmer is both ecologically and economically very successful. An example of sustainable farming that in times of BSE and subvention farming makes one think.
Now, the first one is, Sepp Holzer is a salty dog. For 12 days, I attended a series of workshops that he had in Washington State, and I got a chance to visit with some of the translators, because he doesn't speak a lick of English, and I don't speak a lick of German. And it turns out that there's a lot that he had to say that the translators refused to translate. And they're pretty clear that he's a salty dog, and he's not. There's a lot of language of the German language that he's not bashful to use. That interesting trackhoe, that spider trackhoe, he's a big fan of it. It can go up very steep mountainsides and be like at some crazy angle and still be able to dig. I'm not sure if there's anything like that in the Missoula area. This film, again, 12 years old, he now makes his raised beds. Now there you saw raised beds that were probably like this high. He now makes them 6 feet tall. Now if you think about it, one of the fascinating aspects, especially for Missoula, is that if you've got something that's 6 feet tall like that, and let's suppose it happens to be facing into the sun, then during the colder months, it's a much better solar collector. Because anything that's flat, when the sun's low, it reflects more than it absorbs. But if you've got something that's kind of a 90-degree angle into the sun, it's going to collect much better and be much warmer. So when you're talking about season extenders, that would be one. And now, the word of the day, and I want you all to say it with me, is hugelkultur. Oh man, you guys are so quick. One more time. Hugelkultur. Oh, right. So in my permaculture design course, when I was getting trained, then we kind of went around, we developed our own little chant whenever we'd hike. Hugelkultur, but anyway, that's another day. Questions? Yes, sir.
I really didn't see much mulch or hugelkultur. Is that because he's feeding a lot of that fallen dead matter to the animals?
Well, you know, when I use the word hugelkultur, I should probably tell you what it means. That's a thought. So hugelkultur is the part where it's actually what's under the bed that counts. So all those logs that he took down, that if he were to try and sell them to the sawmill, he wouldn't get as much money as it took to cut them and take them down to the log truck. He just buried them right there. So now you've got all this organic matter buried, and then he builds a 6 foot tall, say I'm 6'6", that tall, a 6 foot tall raised bed, you know, huge, full of these great big logs in the middle. Now for the first year or two, it's going to be like, oh, no big deal, it's a raised bed. But about the 3rd year, that's going to have rotted enough that it absorbs water and holds it for many, many months. Hence, you can grow stuff in desert-like conditions without irrigation. That's one technique out of many. And any nutrients that come down and hit that log, the log's going to absorb them and hold onto them. Hugelkultur is something that I think really needs to be implemented all over Missoula. So many people are like pruning trees or having a tree taken out or whatever, and they're just taking it to the dump, or maybe some of it's going to eco-compost. Or what? That's true. There's some of it there, but Mark Vandermeer's operation, right? Oh, okay. Different thing than I'm thinking about. But yes, there are other destinations. But the thing is that why not put it to use on your own land? Why spend the fuel to pack it all over town or out of town or anything like that? Why not use it right where you are? And people are like trying to grow their own gardens, and it's kind of like, oh man, they're out there irrigating it every day. And every time you irrigate, you wash away some of the nutrients. So now, have I answered your question or have I babbled a lot?
I didn't understand why it was so bare on top and not more mulch on top of everything, if it's been going on for a few years.
So I didn't say
For
this.
example, you mean where he was doing the turnips, there was no other greenery, it was just bare?
Well, a lot of his garden, or a lot of his land was exposed earth, fairly exposed.
It's a relative thing, I would say.
So older plots maybe have a thicker cover.
Well, a lot of it, now one thing I thought was interesting in this video is that you saw some of his raised bed space where it had trees, like every 12 feet there'd be another tree. And some of his raised bed space had no trees. And so it was just out in the sun. Now, as far as it being exposed, yes, there were times when we're looking at a side view and I saw a lot of buckwheat. So it was kind of a grassy looking thing with a white flower on the top, and it did look kind of sparse. Now, my impression was that A, there were things growing there amongst the buckwheat, and it may have been a little earlier in the season, so it would look a little more barren early, because buckwheat pops up and blossoms pretty fast. But I kind of got the impression that he said at one point, like the narrator was saying, that was like they just started it that year. And now, I know that both Holzer and Fukuoka, when they get new land going, they load it up with a lot of buckwheat and a lot of daikon radish. Because they have, pardon?
A lot of nitrogen fixating
I think neither of those will fix nitrogen. But what they both are famous for is digging deep down into the soil and really kind of plowing things up and breaking things up, and then also digging in deep and pulling stuff up and sharing it around. So my guess is that was probably some brand new stuff.
Yeah.
And you plant something like earlier, we were talking about invasives, and I think that one must have left. Maybe this stuff wasn't her style. But one great way of combating invasives is that if you've got tons of stuff growing already, it at the very least impedes the invasives. Does that answer your question? Good. Yes, sir.
But he also talked about smothering up certain things,
He did, although I have a hard time imagining Sepp smothering nettles. I mean, nettles are such a useful plant. But you did mention that, and in fact, in another video I have, which I won't be showing ever, the narration is so bad that they say that nettles fix nitrogen. It's like, oh, they don't.
I have a question about the seed mix. Is there any way to find out more about what mixing seeds is? I have a huge
Yes, there
lot of
is.
land, but I have pretty much a garden, and I might want to plant some different things mixed together, and I'd like to find out more about it.
How well do you speak German?
I don't know.
Then good luck finding that list. Next question. Actually, I have put a lot of time into trying to get his lists, because it's not just a list. Well, he does have 4 books in print that are in German only. And apparently one of those goes into the seed mixtures in quite some depth.
Can you repeat
I'm here
her
talking
questions?
about it now. What?
Can you repeat her questions? We can't hear back here.
Oh, she's looking to find out about the seed mixes. What's in them? I'd like to know too. I've sent several. In fact, every time I send an email to Sepp's son to ask about it, because Sepp's son speaks a little bit of English. I think it's just too, like I'm asking too big of a question, and he doesn't reply. and so it's something where I believe that one with the seed mixture lists is the one that's being translated to English now. I think that all the stuff that we're watching now, if it's 12 years old, why are we just now learning about it? Now, I found out about this like 6 years ago. But when I got it, it was hard to get. I mean, it took me months to track down a copy of these tapes. And it seems to me that hardly anybody's heard of this. And to me, this stuff is like the most important stuff in the world. And it's like so advanced. It so fixes everything. So yeah, that list, those lists. I'd even like to see the list of lists. I mean, if I could see the list of lists, I could probably make my own lists. Next question. I'll talk about something of my own. Yes, sir.
Sure. I have just from watching those videos, it's kind of, I mean, the size of his land and being on that steep of terrain, it's sort of hard to tell. And that's a pretty large area to garden on. And I was just wondering, when you have seed scattered all over and you're harvesting, it almost seems more like a scavenger hunt than I'm going to go out today and if I'm going to harvest turnips, what is a day, I mean, when you said that he likes to think of himself as gardening for profit as well, so I was just curious, does he spend a lot of time deliberately or does he have a whole army of people who are out, gathering just a daily harvest?
Okay, so the question is, how does he harvest all that much stuff?
Maybe a question
what would
is
a day be like, a harvest day be like?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, sure. I would guess that part of it would be that he's got that tractor with that big bucket on it, and probably drives it up to some part and parks it, and then he makes trips out and gets baskets and brings it back. But it's not just him, it's probably him, his son, his wife, and maybe 3 or 4 interns, and they're all doing that, and they're filling it up and taking it in, and filling it up and taking it in, and filling it up and taking it in. Then a bunch of people come up to the farm and buy it. And they probably do that throughout the day. But now granted, this is indeed a lot of labor. Whereas our traditional farms are going to use some sort of harvesting equipment to go and do this harvest. But the traditional farms also use that equipment to plant the seed. And they also use that equipment to go and spray the pesticides. And they also use that equipment to go and plow the field. And they use the same equipment to go and lay down the fertilizer. And then they'll use a bunch of different equipment in order to lay down the irrigation. So I mean, there's like 6 or 7 big jobs that you don't even have to do it all. And all you got to do is do 2 or 3 times more work for the harvest, because it's got to be done by hand. Then we have a lot of traditional crops, that are still harvested by hand. So now it's just more stuff. Now on a typical day, you're going to take your baskets and whatever, you're going to go along, and there's like 4 things that are on right now. You're going to pick all these 4 things as you go down all these raised bed rows.
Didn't it sound like that he had different seeds that he put different places? So maybe he knows in this area there's more radishes or something, and over here there's more.
That is very true. I mean, basically, in the microclimates that he's doing, he also wants diversity in microclimates. It was observed during the movie that the terraces are not level. They kind of, and so that would mean that at the top of one of those terraces, because it's flat, it's still going to be moister than the slope that's going down to it. But then where the terraces come down and meet, it's going to be much wetter right there. Wetter still. So now, if you've got a lot of varied terrain, you're going to have a lot of different kinds of microclimates. And also, there's going to be a lot of variation in the pH. There's going to be a lot of variation of a variety of things. Like, I remember one of the things that he said that stuck in my head is, where you see ferns, that's where you plant potatoes and sunchokes. So then, you're right, he does have areas where there's a lot of this, and here's another area where there's a lot of this, and stuff like that. But I think he keeps trying to plant a little bit of everything everywhere, knowing that it's probably not going to do good there because the soil is more suited to something else. Next question. Yes, ma'am.
If I wanted to make some raised beds like that in my garden, do I want to do some
This is where I step away from Sepp, and if Sepp were here, he would tell me, catastrophe! So, Sepp is very emphatic that you detect which way the wind generally goes, and then you will not build your bed depending on where the sun goes, but you will build your bed depending on the direction of the wind, and you will build several of them. I focus on building on slopes, and I give a lot of weight to cold air coming down the mountainside, and I want it to keep going. I don't want to hold it up. So I try to build my beds in such a way that they kind of weave, but yet always have paths so that the air that's flowing down can go through my beds and go right on out, keep right on going, and not get my stuff cold. Now, if the mission is to have that good southern exposure like we were talking about before, then yeah, I'd say direct your bed east-west. I mean, if you're in town, which you probably are.
If you're in the flats.
And you're in the flats.
You're on the flats.
And you're surrounded by all your neighbors' trees that are too big. Then yes, I would say do it based on the direction of the sun. And I would indeed do an east-west, so that way I can get as much sun as possible. Now you're suggesting south-facing, so that way I could extend on that one side. I could extend the season. On the other side, I could expect a shorter season.
Regarding raised beds, my raised beds are like molded bales of hay that I get from a lot of 2-foot height raised beds and things. And they're in circles. This is huge, circles labyrinth to get back to whatever vegetable it is that I'm not understanding. I'm on top.
So
I
when,
get inside my dinner.
so circles. I've seen a lot of people doing spirals that I think are stupid, because then you gotta like walk. So you said labyrinth, in which case I'm assuming that like there's a shortcut to the middle. Yeah. Seems like everybody wants to do the spiral thing. It's like, no, don't do that. Moldy hay, awesome stuff. I love using. Are you familiar with Ruth Stout? So yeah. Ruth Stout, she's the gardening goddess of the 1920s. She uses a lot of moldy hay. However, if you keep it in a bale and then plant it in a bale, which some people are wanting to do, that can get to be too hot for some plants. And so I've seen people do a hybrid of that where they mix in some soil and some hay, so that way it kind of cools it off a bit, so it doesn't get too hot. But Ruth Stout's techniques are to mulch on the top with lots of moldy hay, but don't let the moldy hay touch the plant. In fact, keep it about at least 6 inches away. Yours is buried. Yeah. See, now I personally would not do that, although I'm very interested to hear how yours did. Although a lot of people who do things that turn out to really suck, they're like, oh, it's really great, but it's because they haven't seen what's really great. So I'd like to see some comparative stuff between like a hugelkultur bed and what you're doing. I imagine a hugelkultur bed would be better. Because my concerns of like when your hay, because hay has a carbon to nitrogen ratio of 30 to 1, which is perfect for composting. So a bale of hay can get to like 130, 140 degrees as it breaks down, which most growies don't care for. So a bale of straw, on the other hand, straw is so much better for that kind of thing. Straw would then be a lot like hugelkultur, because the carbon to nitrogen ratio is more like 300 to 1. Any other questions? So let's see. The earth cellars, root cellars, animal shelters. He builds those. So in fact, he could build one of those in a day. He has a design where he gets in there with a trackhoe. He pushes logs into the ground, puts logs on the top, throws like a pond liner over the top of it, and then covers it in dirt. One day. Then he'll have like cattle. It'll be like a cattle shelter. And the cattle will go in there, and it'll be like 20 below outside, and the cattle will go in there, and it'll be more like 40 inside. So they'll be, and because of that, so cattle don't need as much food. When they're really cold, they need lots more food so that they can stay warm. Then their internals will like get them warmed up again. So he's got lots of these things all over his land, which he uses for storing food and for animal shelters. In the film we just saw, I have another translation. Only, it's that part where he was pointing into the forest and talking about how the government's doing it all wrong and stuff like that. Only in the other translation, it has him doing the full German version. And it goes on and on. He's like going on German and he's gesturing and he's doing this and he's, and boy, if you want to swear a lot, I think German's the language. Because you can work in all that kind of guttural spinning stuff. And so he goes on and on and on, and German, and finally the translation comes. The government doesn't understand. So let's see, 3 generations have to pay a tax for this land, and then the amount of money that you get is less than what it takes to get it down off of the hill. He uses cardboard and newspaper. So you can see some of that in some of his raised beds. I'm against that. And I'm of a minority in the permaculture world. About 30% of us are against the use of paper and cardboard in raised beds. Does anybody know why? Does anybody know why some people would be against that?
High carbon. Coloring ink.
So we got inks, we got what? Dyes and blues. Anything else? So it turns out that in order to make paper, there's 2 processes. And basically cardboard is nothing but layers and layers of paper this way, and then more layers and layers this way, and then the corrugation going like this, and then they're glued together. So there's 2 ways to make paper. There's a mechanical way, which is fairly organic. I mean, they don't really add a lot to it. The lignins in the wood break down and kind of bond everything together, and that's cool. But the more common way is a chemical process to get the lignins to do that kind of a thing. And some of those chemicals are a little bit spooky. And some qualities of papers are like a higher quality, and those high quality papers turn out to be kind of scary when you're trying to put it in your compost pile. Then, with the cardboard, now you've got your corrugation in there, and then there's a glue holding it. Now that glue is mostly cornstarch. So you're thinking, oh, well that, how would you eat that? Of course, it's GMO-based cornstarch, but that's really still not the problem. The real problem is that it's not only cornstarch. There's, of course, some other chemicals that are put in there, and they're not very good. So, and then there's all the tapes that are usually stuck on the cardboard. So a lot of people will be like peeling off all this tape and stuff in order to be able to use the cardboard to make different kinds of raised beds and stuff like that. It gets, obviously, Sepp does it. And some of the other big people in the permaculture world, they're happy to use cardboard and paper, newspaper, as part of this. I've been to sites where somebody's like, oh, this tree is really sick, I don't know why, and I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, boy, it seems like it's not getting enough water. Let's dig down and see what's messed up in the soil. And then we hit this thick layer of newspaper. Oh yeah, I put that down 5 years ago. 5 years! This layer of newspaper, it's like still, and this is like over in the Seattle area. It's been in the ground for 5 years, and you can still read what it says on the newspaper. It makes an impenetrable layer. And so it suffocates the tree roots. Not only do the tree roots not get water, they don't get air. They need air. Anyway, so there's an area where I differ from Sepp. Much rather use the moldy hay. Yeah, it won't, in my opinion. He has Sepp raises 4 different kinds of earthworms. We're almost out of time. Each of these different kinds of earthworms does a different job. Some of them make lots of aeration this way. Some of them go down 2 meters deep and make aeration that way. Sepp, so a lot of Sepp's land is very acidic, and he has never added any lime to correct the acidity. Instead, apparently, some of these earthworms will dig down and get lime-like materials and bring them back up and poop them out And this effectively limes his soil. Wacky.
Does he buy his worms or does he make
Yes. To both. I mean, they probably weren't naturally, he probably didn't find them there naturally. So he probably brought some in. Now this could also be considered like an aspect of invasiveness.
The library will be closing in 30 minutes. Web Valley, your internet access area, will be closing in 15 minutes. Thank you.
So, that's always good to know. So you probably got a few of them in. Now, as far as invasiveness goes, there are some places in the United States that never had earthworms, and now they're bringing in earthworms, and it's causing a lot of problems. It's not a simple thing, but on Sepp's land, clearly he's got them now. I don't know if they were there before or not. Usually, land that's coniferous, so a lot of conifer trees, tends to not have any earthworms because they just don't like the acidity. But that's kind of what Sepp was saying. Is like, look, they grew all these conifers here, and now there's like no life. So he uses, in one of the videos next week, he'll be talking about how he creates a biotope, which is kind of like a utopia of biological activity. And but when in person, he uses more frequently the term biodeath. He'll like point. I mean, so we went to different farms, and then he would point out what he hates about this farm. It's kind of educational experience for everybody. Although the person who actually owns the farm is probably feeling a lot of pain. There was one farm where he actually kind of liked it though, so that was kind of neat. But anyway, he points at things and says biodeath, and sure enough, it's like there's like hardly any life there. Anyway, did I answer a question or am I just yammering again? Did you see the sweet potatoes? So picky. I thought it was like fall or winter. That's what
There was still snow on the ground.
Well, I try to dig those things up in the spring, they're all in mush.
Sepp is a big fan of Native Americans. So when he was in Washington State, there was one day where we didn't have any class because he was going off for some kind of ceremony with the Native Americans. Some tribe in the area had a special ceremony just for him, and they gave him all kinds of special garb, which he wore the next day. But he has a powerful, you'd think he'd have a powerful fascination for the natives of Austria, going back maybe 1,000 years or something. But no, he has a very powerful interest in Native American cultures. And so when he's in the United States, he spends a lot of time visiting, and he gets the red carpet treatment. Profitability is what counts, is what they said in the first video. So, all right. Any other questions?
Question I just was glad to see that he had worms. I understand that anything that goes through a worm is purified. They don't even need some toxic substance as part of the diet. So maybe that's what
Well, I would have to say that that brings up an interesting point. In the world of permaculture, there are two general approaches. There are a lot of people that will go to a lot of land that is utterly toxic. Nothing will grow there. And their personal permaculture mission is to go there and remediate that land and to bring it back to life. And then there's and then they get to the point where it's like, you know, they will choose to eat from that land, even though there was this horrible toxic mess there before. I'm not one of those people. So I would rather start at the other. So like for example, most organic practices today are like, well, what is the conventional practice, and how can we replace the toxic gig with less toxic gig? So now we're just slightly non-toxic or barely non-toxic as far as we're aware, as far as science makes us aware. And that's the bare minimum for organic. So there might be all kinds of toxicity in there that we just don't know about yet. So I like to approach from the opposite end. What's something that's totally wild, it has nothing applied at all, and then I barely make changes to get where I want to be. So as opposed to trying to put down cardboard and newspaper, I think that's more down here. I'm going to not do that. I might go with moldy hag or nothing. Just planting the right seed so it'll take care of itself. Any other questions? I pronounce this is done. Thank you for coming, everybody.